They fired me while I was mid-sentence, in front of 12 decision makers and a live negotiation screen. No warning, no hesitation. Just a cold HR directive slipped quietly into the internal chat window like a knife beneath the table. I had spent 8 months crafting that pitch, traveling across 2 continents and rewriting financial models through jet lag and silence just to see the deal collapse before my eyes. Not because I failed, but because they were too afraid I would win. But I did not leave angry. I did not fight back in the room or beg for clarity. I simply closed my laptop, stood up with my pulse steady, and walked out. Not just from the pitch, but from the system that thought cutting my name meant cutting my influence. What they did not realize was that the moment they fired me, they freed me. If you've ever been replaced mid-victory, just leave a dot. Or tell me, what did they lose when they lost you? They fired me while I was mid-sentence, in front of 12 decision makers and a live negotiation screen. No warning, no hesitation. Just a cold HR directive slipped quietly into the internal chat window like a knife beneath the table. I had spent 8 months crafting that pitch, traveling across 2 continents, and rewriting financial models through jet lag and silence, just to see the deal collapse before my eyes. Not because I failed, but because they were too afraid I would win. Slide 9 had just gone up. The CFO of Sandrix was leaning forward. I saw his assistant tilt the screen toward him, pointing to the weighted forecast model I had revised at 3 a.m. 3 nights ago. And then it happened. A ping, the softest sound in a silent room. I glanced down. One line, no subject, no greeting. Just the words, effective immediately. Please exit systems post-pitch, sent from HR, sent at 10:14 a.m. exactly 6 minutes in. I kept talking, because that is what you do when you're too stunned to breathe, when you feel the floor shifting beneath you, but you're still expected to sound like the most confident person in the room. I kept going through projected margins and procurement incentives while my throat dried and my fingers went cold. Because nobody else saw it. Because they didn't want anyone else to see it. Because a clean execution requires silence. They didn't want a conversation. They wanted a disappearance. And I gave it to them. At least in the room. I finished the pitch, took the questions, deflected to Marissa twice when I needed 5 seconds to swallow the bile crawling up my throat. I nodded when the COO complimented our risk controls and even smiled when the Sandrix chair said we'd clearly done our homework. And the moment the screen faded to the post-call holding slide, I clicked out. Not just from the call, but from them. Not because I was weak, not because I lost, but because they had shown me what I already knew. I was not part of their future, just a tool they had used, carefully, quietly, until I was no longer convenient. I closed the window, locked my laptop, sat for a moment in the silence of my apartment, where the only sound was the heater creaking in protest. Then I stood up, poured myself a glass of water, and opened the drawer I had not touched in 5 months. Inside was a folder, not labeled, not logged, just held in place by muscle memory and preparation. Inside that folder was a name, and it was not theirs. The folder had no name, just a corner worn soft from the number of times I had opened it without opening it. I pulled it out like I had rehearsed this moment, not out of vengeance, but out of design. Because when you spend long enough watching people pretend not to see you, you start preparing for the day they finally erase you. Inside, a sequence of outlines, company-side permissions, timestamp slides, client feedback logs, not for Sandrix, for something else, something older, something mine. Because long before they cut me loose mid-pitch, I had already felt the quiet chill of being pushed out. The way my name started disappearing from email threads, the way the junior team started copying in someone 2 titles below me, just in case. The way my strategy doc had been re-uploaded with a final edit that wasn't mine. Small signs, but they build like frost on a window, slow, silent. And then, one day, you cannot see through anymore. It started after a restructuring meeting 3 months earlier. I was asked to present a consolidation roadmap, a detailed sequence for absorbing 3 overlapping divisions into a single cost-efficient unit. I spent 2 weekends building it, presented on Monday. Grayson nodded along. So did the new VP, a man who had introduced himself as just here to listen and left with a copy of my deck. 2 weeks later, I saw my roadmap on a new org-wide memo. No credit, no mention, just lifted whole, scrubbed of its origin, and labeled version 2.0. I remember staring at it on my screen and laughing. Not the kind of laugh you hear in conference rooms. The kind you let slip when you realize it's already too late to protest, because they do not steal what they plan to keep. They only take what they intend to replace. So I began building something they could not replace. It started in the late hours, not rage-driven, but clean, meticulous. I called two people I trusted, one from compliance, one from legal. Both had left months ago, both had left quietly. We spoke in shorthand, no names, just patterns. They understood before I finished explaining. One message: send the bones, I'll fill them in. That night, Trevant stopped being an idea. It started breathing, but I kept showing up to my day job like nothing had changed. I led client calls. I fixed proposals. I rewrote an executive memo after midnight because the voice wasn't strong enough. I stayed late so someone else could take an early flight. I played the role they expected, even as they shrunk the room around me inch by inch, until the day they closed the door entirely, while I was still speaking. And even then, I didn't panic. I didn't lash out. I didn't screenshot the message or forward it to my lawyer. I simply opened the folder I had prepared for this very kind of silence. And I smiled, because when someone shows you they never saw your worth, they also show you what they fear, that you might prove it elsewhere. 3 months before they fired me mid-pitch, I stood in a dim boardroom with the lights half off and the deal half dead. The client, a Fortune 100 utility conglomerate, had just walked out after 6 weeks of negotiation. Legal was frozen. Sales was stammering. The interim strategy lead, some shiny-suited transplant from another coast, sat slack-jawed, blinking at the speakerphone like it might ring again. No one knew what to say, so I did. I picked up the proposal they had left behind, scanned the margins, then walked out without a word. 15 minutes later, I was on the phone with their CFO's proxy, a quiet man with a sharper instinct than anyone on our side seemed to have. I asked him one question: what clause killed it? He told me. I rewrote the structure that night. By morning, the deal was not only back on the table, it had expanded, more scope, higher revenue, and their board signed in under 2 days. It was a recovery that should have made headlines. Internally, it barely made a Slack emoji. They didn't celebrate, not really. There was a quiet, "Thanks for stepping in," from one of the directors, followed by a nod from Grayson like I had simply patched a leak instead of salvaging the ship. The irony? A week before that, the same people had circulated a performance memo calling my risk tolerance highly variable, a phrase that had been copy-pasted into my review without ever showing up in my results, because results were never the point. That night, as I walked through the terminal on my way to yet another client fly-in, I opened that memo again, read it twice, then deleted it. Not because it didn't matter, but because I had already moved on. Not from the job, not yet, but from the belief that anything I built inside that system would ever really belong to me. They liked me best when I fixed what they broke, not when I built what they couldn't control. So I stopped offering them the pieces I cared about. I gave them solutions, but not ownership. I followed protocol, but not allegiance. And quietly, I started laying bricks where no one else could see. And no press releases, no domain name, just a name whispered once between two friends: Trevant. Back at the office, someone had added a new name to our weekly strategy call. A junior analyst who had been reporting to me for 6 months, now listed as lead contributor. She was good, she was sharp, and I saw the play. Elevate the safe one, soften the edge, phase the threat. But I kept showing up, not to fight but to observe. Because the mistake people make when they cut you slowly is thinking you won't feel it until the end. What they forget is that pain has a longer memory than praise. And I remembered everything. The moment they praised someone else for a sentence I wrote. The moment my slide deck showed up in another department's original strategy. The moment HR scheduled a check-in that felt like a countdown. And yet I didn't resist. I documented. I archived. I made it easy for them to underestimate me. Because while they were trying to make me invisible, I was making myself untouchable. And when the $72 million pitch came into view, the one I had been grooming for over half a year, I knew they would either give me the credit or try to take it entirely. There was no in-between, and that was fine. I wasn't planning to share it. Not with them, anyway. The first thing I did was sync the files, not to their system but mine. They never noticed. The folders looked identical, but mine lived on an encrypted mirror built 6 months earlier after I noticed the first discrepancy in document tracking. One of my white papers, a pricing model I'd spent 2 weeks refining, had shown up in a board pre-read packet. The author line had been stripped. The formatting was new, but the formulas were mine, every variable, every rationale. That was when I knew. I did not confront them. I did not ask for clarification. I started saving copies, quietly, cleanly. Not because I planned revenge, I did not, but because I refused to watch my work get white-labeled and washed away again. They had already begun erasing me in pieces, first from footnotes, then from invites, then from the story. So I wrote a different one. Every week I synced versions of key decks, negotiations, term sheets, not to local storage but to a private instance mirrored in real time, approved by internal protocol for cross-border client continuity. That clause had saved me once before when a German partner required physical backups. I simply reused it. No flags, no suspicion. When HR sent a revised policy acknowledgement to sign, I printed it, reviewed it in silence, then signed it with a smile. But before I did, I photographed the old version side by side, time-stamped, verified, stored in the same encrypted chain. When someone updated permissions on a project folder and my access accidentally dropped, I logged the email header. When a shared pitch template was locked to view only minutes after I edited it, I exported the diff. When a junior team member recited one of my old phrases in a pitch call and the director nodded with pride, I hit record, not out of malice, but memory. I was not bitter, I was observant, because the most dangerous people are not the ones who rage, they are the ones who notice. And I noticed everything. Grayson no longer copied me on board updates. Mallory had started joining calls I used to lead, smiling a little too wide, deferring a little too loudly. The new VP of Revenue Strategy, someone I had once coached through her first investor pitch, now forwarded my analysis with minor comments that changed nothing but the authorship trail. It was surgical, and it was sanctioned. But they forgot one thing. I had never needed noise to be effective. I had never fought for credit. I fought for clarity. And clarity, when wielded quietly, is sharper than anything they could weaponize. So I kept building, outside their line of sight. I registered a separate LLC. I licensed a lightweight CRM. I opened a zero-noise legal retainer with a firm that used initials instead of logos. I drafted alt decks under a new font, not for poaching, not for war, for freedom. Because when you realize they will never give you your name back, you build something they cannot touch. The first message came 2 days after I walked out. It was a reply to the main project inbox, now under Mallory's name. Simple, polite, and devastating. We'd like to reconfirm if Claire Monroe will be on next week's call. If not, we may need to reschedule. That was it. No emotion, no protest. Just a client quietly requesting the presence of the one person they trusted to move the deal forward. They passed it around internally like it was an issue of scheduling. Mallory replied with a standard message about team restructuring. She even copied Grayson, who responded with an all-staff reminder, "No one is irreplaceable." Technically, he was right. Titles can be reassigned. Email signatures can be changed. Meeting roles can be redistributed. But trust, real earned trust, cannot be reassigned. Because clients do not remember job titles. They remember the person who picked up their midnight call, the one who rewrote legal clauses under deadline, the one who did not need a script to make the hard parts make sense. That person had left. But they had not noticed, yet. They continued to send the documents I had prepared, lightly reworded, reformatted, but hollow. The structure was still mine, but the substance had faded. It showed. 3 clients asked to delay their standing check-ins. 2 legal departments raised questions about phrasing that had passed review for months. And one partner requested that any future meetings include whoever designed the original framework. That phrase, original framework, was something I had once used during a Tokyo alignment session. It had never appeared in our formal materials. The words had outlived my presence, and still they could not see it. The newly appointed Vice President of International Strategy prepared for a major call with Eurocom's compliance team. She presented a revised pitch based entirely on the strategy deck I had assembled months earlier. The design was familiar, the logic intact, but the delivery, off-key. Linda Clark, Eurocom's general counsel opened the call with a cool tone. We were under the impression that Claire Monroe would be leading this phase. There was a pause, then a long rehearsed explanation about internal transitions. Linda did not push back. She simply ended the meeting 8 minutes early, stating that her team would reconnect once there's clarity on leadership. They never did. That week, 3 calendar invitations were declined. 1 legal review was delayed by a full month. A partner firm quietly removed Venturon from a shared collaboration space. No reason given. Grayson called it seasonal friction. I called it the start. The unraveling had begun, not with noise, but with absence. No loud complaints, no leaked memos, just a quiet shift. And silence, when repeated, becomes signal. But they had trained themselves not to listen. This time they should have, because the silence belonged to me. The Monday forecast call was supposed to be routine. It was the weekly sync where each regional lead gave updates, and the leadership team nodded politely between coffee sips and calendar glances. But that morning, the call started late. And tense, Grayson's camera stayed off. Mallory's voice was too loud, then too quiet, and when the numbers appeared, no one said a word for 6 full seconds. The slide showed 3 clients, all flagged yellow, the same 3 I had carried across time zones, the same 3 that had once lit up green after every review. Now their progress bars were stalled, their engagement scores were flat, and their communications had gone quiet. Grayson finally unmuted. Why has Eurocom not confirmed their next milestone? Silence. Why did Brazil Link pull access from the shared dashboard? More silence. Then someone from Strategic Operations spoke up, carefully, like walking across ice. There's no indication of dissatisfaction, but no confirmation either. The legal checkpoints are behind schedule, and their teams are not responding to revised draft notes. Grayson pressed harder. He asked about outreach logs, contact frequency, alternate channels. He used the word transparency 4 times in 3 minutes. Mallory nodded along, adding that new relationships take time to settle. But the issue wasn't new relationships. It was that the old one, the only one they had trusted, was gone. Someone tried to recover momentum by pointing to a new proposal being drafted for another mid-tier firm in Eastern Europe. Grayson shut it down. That's not a legacy deal. That's noise. Fix what's breaking. I watched from afar, not on the call. I had no access anymore, but I did not need to be there to hear the cracks. Jenna, still embedded in legal, texted me later that day. They are panicking. Compliance is chasing replies from Eurocom. Brazil Link is stonewalling. Tokyo has not returned calls since last Thursday. I asked her if anyone had mentioned my name. No one dares, but everyone knows. That was the shift. When systems falter and no one knows why, the silence begins to take shape. It gets heavier, it fills the rooms, and eventually someone asks the question they were afraid to ask. That afternoon, a regional director from the Tokyo side looped in 4 people on an internal thread. The subject line was neutral: alignment on client communication pathways. But the body said something else entirely. Has Claire Monroe been officially replaced as lead on the Trident architecture rollout? If so, who is serving as continuity point? They didn't send it to me, of course, but the moment that message existed, the illusion cracked, because it meant someone had noticed the difference, not in process, but in presence. They were not asking for a title. They were asking for the person they trusted to guide them through uncertainty. That person was no longer on their calendar. Back inside Venturon, leadership tried to regroup. They organized what they called a control sync, an emergency meeting to realign messaging, reassure stakeholders, and reassert control. But when they joined the video call, only 5 of the 12 external stakeholders showed up. 1 sent a deputy, 1 canceled last minute, and the rest? No reply. The ones who did show up listened with folded arms and blank expressions. They said little. They nodded once or twice. Then they asked for call notes to be sent later, to an alternate email. That was the moment Grayson began to understand. Because when clients start rerouting communication away from your leadership team, it is not just a preference. It is a verdict. No one said the name. No one made a scene. But I had already left a mark they could not erase. Not from the documents, not from the timelines, and not from the trust that had once turned every hesitation into a signature. And now, without me, They had to speak a language they never bothered to learn. Silence. By Wednesday, the system stopped pretending. Slack channels blinked with unread alerts. Shared folders stalled mid-load. Dashboards refreshed into emptiness. What began as whispers of delay had become a quiet unraveling. Someone from the New York team flagged that their access to Eurocom's legal workspace was denied. An hour later, Tokyo reported bounce-backs from compliance contacts they had spoken to just 2 days earlier. Sao Paulo said Brazil Link had rerouted their inquiries to an unfamiliar third-party email address. Every update passed up the chain sounded smaller than it was, until they added up. Grayson called an emergency huddle. He sat stiff in a half-lit room, eyes darting, tie loose. Mallory stood behind him, expression fixed. Jenna messaged me updates from her screen. Why is Linda Clark not responding? Did someone notify Asano? Why is Brazil Link escalating this to external counsel? No one had answers. Grayson refused to speak my name, but it hung in the gaps between each question. He kept looking down, jaw twitching as if hoping the silence would settle. But silence was the message. By noon, engagement metrics dipped into single digits. Portal activity stalled. Draft approvals froze. Integration schedules vanished from the master timeline. Legal tried to reach Eurocom's GC. The line rang 7 times, then redirected to an assistant who said simply, "She's not available for venture and communication." The air in the room turned brittle. Mallory issued a press statement. Nothing concrete, just soft language about alignment and new leadership phases. It went unnoticed. Clients had stopped watching. At 3:17 p.m., Grayson tried Luis Mata again. The response came from a firm in Argentina. Mr. Mata is no longer accepting calls routed from Venture and Technologies. Future correspondence should be submitted through counsel. No confrontation, no debate, just procedural extinction. It wasn't just the deal that was failing. It was the illusion of control. The system was crumbling the way walls do when the load-bearing beam is quietly removed. No explosion, just a slow buckle you notice too late. And through it all, my name was never said. But it echoed in the hollow space left behind, because collapse does not announce itself. It arrives through silence, and this time it was theirs. There was no announcement, no blast email, no town hall, but everyone on the 32nd floor knew something had shifted. The air itself felt different, thinner, cautious, as if the walls were waiting for someone to admit what had happened. They never did. What they got instead were rejections dressed as silence. No angry statements, no outright resignations, just nothing. The calls went unanswered. The usual instant replies from Eurocom's legal team? Quiet. The detailed follow-ups from Telnova's CTO? Gone. Even Brazil Link, normally warm and chatty, sent only a 3-word reply to the investor update request. No longer applicable. It was not loud. That made it worse. Because silence is never neutral in a company like Venturon. It is either obedience or judgment, and this time it was the latter. I watched from afar, from a safe distance, but not emotionally removed. Jenna sent me updates from inside legal. Raheem tracked their panicked system queries. At first it looked like routine follow-ups, pinging archived contract versions, checking data rooms, but within hours it turned desperate. They tried resending access requests to the portals, tried forwarding the integration roadmap I had written, but the credentials bounced back. Every door they reached for had already closed. 3 legacy firms, 3 vanished lifelines, and not a single explanation. The board met twice that day, first to ask why no one could get through, then again to ask why no one had seen it coming. The PR team drafted a press statement calling it a temporary realignment delay. Grayson tore it up, said it sounded weak, told them to wait. But the longer they waited, the more obvious the loss became. The clients weren't hesitant. They were gone, and not in anger, in resolve. Not one of them spoke publicly. Not one offered Venturon a post-mortem. They simply rerouted, not because they were led away, but because they had been watching. They had seen who showed up in every meeting, who revised contracts at midnight, who negotiated without ego, who answered questions before they were even asked. And it wasn't Mallory, it was me. I did not cheer, I did not pour a drink or call anyone to say, "I told you so." That kind of victory always feels cheap. What I felt instead was weightless, like something heavy had been lifted off my shoulders and dropped on someone else's desk. What Grayson and his board never understood was this. I had never been competing for credit. I had been building trust. Slowly, quietly, patiently. And when the moment came, trust did what it always does. It moved. Not because I asked, but because they knew. That afternoon, as the sun stretched long shadows across my apartment floor, I stood by the window with a cup of black coffee and no plans to gloat. Just peace. No call came. No one apologized. But 3 clients moved forward with the platform I had built. And that was the only conversation I needed. Venturon called it a regroup, but what they really meant was triage. On Monday, they rebooked the Global Rollout Summit, same location, same room. But this time, the chairs were filled with substitutes. People with titles but no authority, plans but no leverage. The official agenda still listed strategic integration session with clients. Yet the clients weren't there, and no one explained why. They just kept talking. Slides without context, numbers no one believed, strategies that unraveled mid-sentence. Mallory sat at the front, flanked by a junior strategy analyst and a compliance lead from another department. She smiled too much, paused for questions that never came, tried to improvise her way through my old roadmap, but the room was airless. Not tense, just hollow, because everyone sensed it. You can fake knowledge, you can fake confidence, but you cannot fake presence. And I wasn't there. What struck me most was how quickly they turned inward. No one looked at the empty seats and wondered why. They looked at each other and tried to blame. One exec blamed sales for not securing buy-in. Sales blamed legal for delays. Legal blamed strategy. Strategy just stayed quiet and waited for Mallory to speak again, hoping she'd say something that sounded like control. She didn't. Across the river, in a quiet brownstone we'd rented as a temporary base, I was reviewing onboarding flows with Jenna and Raheem. Each client had completed the security handshake. Their teams had begun submitting integration queries. All systems were live, all responses instant. The transition was happening, but not with fireworks, with rhythm. That was the part Venturon never understood. You don't win trust with drama. You win it with consistency. And once lost, it doesn't come back because you panic. It comes back because you've earned the right to speak again. Which they hadn't. That afternoon, Raheem handed me a single-page printout, just one sentence from Brazil Link's CTO sent privately to our internal dashboard. This is the first time someone delivered exactly what they promised. I read it twice, not because I didn't believe it, but because it made everything quiet inside me. After years of correcting other people's mistakes, softening hard messages, translating failure into strategy, I was finally building something without having to apologize for its success. Venturon's headquarters still stood tall on the skyline, all glass and steel and perception. But inside, the lights were starting to flicker. The clients had left, the talent was leaving, and the story they thought they controlled was slipping from their hands. Because you can own a logo, but you cannot own the people who made it matter. No formal statement, no email from HR, no press quote. Mallory Hart vanished first, no goodbye, no LinkedIn post, just a removed calendar entry and a silent floor shuffle that left her office door shut for good. Grayson followed days later, voted off the board in a late afternoon session no one reported on, but everyone in legal whispered about. The building they once ruled now carried no trace of them. No nameplate, no plaque, no echo. But mine stayed. We signed the final Trident consolidation in a quiet room without photographers or speeches. Just paper, ink, and presence. Raheem slid the final budget across the table. Jenna nodded. Noah smiled without saying a word. We knew what this moment was. Not revenge, not closure, just restoration. Later, I walked through the Trident headquarters lobby, warm light pooling on the floors. The new etching under the logo was subtle. Stainless steel, clean font, Trident. Founded by Marin Blake. I didn't pause, I didn't smile, I just kept walking. Not because it meant nothing, but because it no longer needed to mean everything. They fired me while I was mid-sentence, pitching a $72 million deal I had built from scratch. They erased my name, hoping the structure would stand without the architect. It didn't. They thought removing me mid-flight would end the story, but all it did was remove their name from what came next. If you've ever had your name removed from a project you bled for, if you've ever stayed silent while someone else got the credit, then hear this. You're not invisible, you're not replaceable, and you're not done. Some battles don't need fire to win, they need focus, they need stillness, they need time. And when the time comes, let your presence speak louder than your pain. If her story struck something in you, like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories where the quiet ones rise, hit subscribe. We're just getting started.